Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. I've been thinking a lot lately about the kind of father I want to be someday. I'm not married yet, not even close. But something inside me keeps asking, when that time comes, what kind of life do you want your kids to see you living? That question's been haunting me more than any performance, more than any concert or interview. Because for the first time in my life, it's not about the next comeback or the next goal. It's about the future version of me that a little human might one day call dad. And I realized I don't want to raise my kids the same way I was raised by fame. People think being Jungkook means everything is perfect. Money, freedom, fans, love from every direction. But if you've lived in my shoes, you know that kind of life can also make you forget who you are when the lights go off. I grew up inside cameras, training rooms, hotel rooms, airports. Every moment since I was a teenager has been about being seen, being prepared, being perfect. And lately I've been asking myself, what would it do to a kid growing up like that? Would I accidentally pass that pressure down without even noticing? That's why I wanted to talk about this, because I don't want to repeat the cycle. I don't want my future child to feel like love has to be earned by performance. I want to raise them differently. But to do that, I have to first be honest about how I was shaped. When I look at the members, Namjoon, Jinhyung, yoongijungkook, Hoseokyoung, Jimin, taehyung, I realized we were all raised by something bigger than parents. We were raised by this machine called BTS. It became our school, our family, our shelter, and sometimes our storm. Namjoon taught me to think before I act. Jin taught me to laugh when things feel heavy. Yoongi showed me that honesty can be quiet but powerful. Hobi taught me that energy is a choice. Taehyung reminded me that art has no rules. And Jimin taught me that love isn't weakness. That caring deeply for people doesn't make you soft, it makes you real. But still, as much as I love all that we built, I know the fame that raised us also took pieces of us. We learned to say I'm fine when we weren't. We learned to smile for cameras while hurting inside. We learned to make every moment look meaningful, even when we were just trying to survive the schedule. If I ever become a father, I don't want my kid to learn that version of strength. I want them to see me cry. I want them to see me rest. I want them to know that even their dad, the guy the world calls Golden Maknae, still gets scared and unsure. There was this one night a few months ago, it was around 3 a.m. I was sitting alone in my studio, scrolling through old videos of us from the Run era. We looked so young, so hungry. I paused at one moment where Jimin hugged me after a hard rehearsal. He didn't say anything, just squeezed me and smiled like everything was okay. And I remember thinking, if I ever have a son, I want him to have a friend like that, someone who doesn't need words to understand him. That moment broke something open inside me. People keep asking me when I'll get married, when I'll settle down. The truth is, I don't know. I'm not waiting for the perfect time. I'm waiting for the right version of me, because I've seen too many people get married while still hiding from themselves. And I don't want to bring a kid into the world until I've learned how to be honest. Not the kind of honesty that fits an interview, but the kind that can sit with pain without running away. I used to think my future kids needed a strong father. Now I think they need a real one. There's a difference. Strong hides everything. Real shows up even when he's broken. I've seen both kinds in my life. My dad was strong, silent, proud, hardworking. But when I joined BTS, I became real in ways he couldn't understand. My members saw me cry more times than my family ever did. They saw me lose control, doubt myself, question everything. And somehow, they loved me through it. That's the kind of environment I want my kids to grow up in. One where love doesn't depend on perfection. Sometimes I imagine it. A small house somewhere quiet. Maybe in Busan, maybe not even in Korea. I'd wake up, make breakfast, take them outside to feel the morning air. No cameras, no stylists, no pressure. Just them learning what peace feels like. I tell them stories about the members, about how Uncle Jimin once danced in the rain because he said happiness shouldn't wait for sunshine. How Uncle Yoongi stayed up 3 nights straight because he believed one song could change someone's life. How Uncle Namjoon once cried over a tree because he felt connected to everything. I tell them that love isn't about saying, I'll protect you. It's about saying, I see you. But I also know how dangerous dreams like that can be when you live my life. Fame doesn't let you disappear easily. And that's what scares me. What if my kids never get a normal day? What if people take pictures of them just because of their last name? What if I can't give them anonymity? That's the part that keeps me awake some nights. I promise myself that if I ever have a family, I'll protect their peace like it's sacred. Not by hiding them, but by building a world around them where being normal isn't impossible. When I told Jimin about this fear, he just smiled and said, then you start changing now, not later. He's right. You don't suddenly become a good father when your kid is born. You practice every day by how you treat yourself and the people you love. So lately, I've been learning how to slow down, how to say no, how to rest without guilt. That's new for me. Because for years, rest felt like weakness. But maybe what my future kids will need isn't a dad who never stops. Maybe they'll need one who knows when to pause. Taehyung said something funny the other night. You'll be the softest dad in the group. And I laughed because maybe that's true. I want to teach them how to sing when they're sad, how to paint when they're angry, how to talk when they're scared. I want to raise them to know emotions aren't enemies. That crying isn't shameful. That love isn't something you earn. It's something you remember. Sometimes I wonder if the world would even let me do that. Because people expect idols to raise idols, to pass on talent, beauty, fame. But what if I don't want that? What if I just want my child to know they can be quiet, invisible, and still worthy? When I was younger, every compliment came with the condition. You're good because you work hard. You're loved because you perform well. I want to raise someone who's loved just because they exist. And maybe that's what this whole journey's been leading to. Not another award, not another chart-topping song, but this learning how to be the kind of person who could love unconditionally. I used to think that was easy. It's not. It takes unlearning everything. Fame teaches you. It takes learning how to be small again, how to live without applause. I've been slowly practicing. Last month, I went for a walk alone in the rain. No umbrella, no security, just me. It felt strange, like I was borrowing a life that wasn't mine. But halfway through, I saw this dad carrying his little daughter on his shoulders. She was laughing so hard, she almost fell backward. And he just kept saying, hold on tight. That image burned into my brain. Not because it was special, but because it was normal. And I realized I want that. Not the stadiums, not the lights. Just that one moment where someone I love feels safe on my shoulders. Namjoon once told me, the way you live now is the blueprint your future self will follow. So I started asking myself, if my son or daughter watched me now, would I be proud of what they're seeing? Would they see a man who loves his work but also loves himself? Or would they see someone chasing approval that never ends? That question hit me hard, because some nights I still feel like the 5-year-old kid who thought love had to be earned. I don't want my kids to inherit that insecurity. People say I'm still too young to think about parenting. Maybe they're right, but I think you start becoming a parent the moment you start imagining a better world for someone else. And that's what I've been doing, imagining. A world where my kids don't have to prove they're enough. A world where family isn't a performance. A world where honesty isn't punished. And maybe that's why I'm still not married. Because I need to be sure I'm ready to create that kind of environment. I don't just want a wedding. I want a foundation. I don't just want love. I want alignment. I've seen too many people rush into marriage because it looks good on paper, beautiful photos, perfect timing, family approval. But real connection isn't about timing, it's about truth. And truth takes time. So when people ask me, Jungkook, when are you getting married? I tell them, when I'm ready to be the kind of man my kids won't have to heal from. That's my real answer. I want to raise my kids differently. I want them to see a man who chose honesty over perfection, who chose peace over pressure, who chose family over fear, and until that day comes, I'll keep practicing. Every song I write, every friendship I keep, every boundary I learn to draw, it's all part of that preparation. Because one day, when that little voice calls me dad, I want to look them in the eyes and know I've already started becoming the man they need. I don't think I've ever said this out loud before, but sometimes I catch myself rehearsing what kind of father I'd be, almost like practicing a song I haven't recorded yet. It's weird, right? But it feels real. I'll be sitting in the studio, maybe after a long night of mixing vocals, and suddenly I start wondering if my kid walked in right now, would they see someone they could look up to or someone trapped by his own success? That question hits me like a punch to the chest every time. There's this image people have of me, the golden maknae, the all-rounder, the guy who can do everything. But that version of me was built by pressure, not peace. I grew up in a world where sleep felt like guilt and rest felt like failure. And I'm still unlearning that. I don't want my future children to grow up thinking love means doing everything perfectly. I want them to know love can exist in mistakes too. The other day, I was talking to Yoongijungkook in his studio. It was one of those quiet nights when the world felt slower than usual. He said something that stuck with me. You can't protect your kids from pain, he told me, but you can show them how to face it. I think about that a lot because for so long, my instinct has been to avoid pain, to cover it with work, to out-sing it. But that's not what I want to teach them. I want them to see that facing your pain doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Namjoon and I talked about family once while we were on a late night drive. He said, kids learn what they see, not what you say. That one sentence hit me harder than any lyric I've ever written because it made me realize it's not about promising my kids the world, it's about showing them the right way to live in it. If I tell them to rest, but they only ever see me overworking, they'll copy my exhaustion. If I tell them to be honest, but they watch me hiding behind a public smile, they'll learn to perform their emotions instead of feeling them. That's the cycle I want to break. I've been part of a team BTS for most of my life. And because of that, I've learned a lot about family without blood. I've learned that love can look like arguing in rehearsal, apologizing without pride, waiting backstage for someone who's struggling. Those lessons came from 7 men who grew up together on camera, but somehow managed to stay brothers off camera too. That's the kind of emotional safety I want to recreate someday at home. Jin once joked, if you have kids, they're going to run the house. And maybe he's right. I want to raise them with enough confidence to question me when I'm wrong, enough empathy to say sorry first, enough self-awareness to know that they're allowed to change their mind, because that's something I didn't have space for when I was young, changing my mind. Once you're an idol, your choices stick to you like tattoos. One wrong move and it follows you for years. But kids deserve the freedom to evolve without guilt. Sometimes I imagine taking my kid on tour with me, not to show them the lights, but to show them what's behind them. The long rehearsals, the team, the sound checks, the exhaustion. I want them to see that every moment on stage has hundreds of quiet sacrifices behind it. Because I don't want them to grow up thinking success is about applause. Success is about integrity, about doing something you love without losing who you are in the process. Hobi-hyung once told me, energy is love made visible. That stuck in my head for years. Maybe that's how I'll raise my kids, with visible love. Not the quiet, cold kind, but the kind that laughs loud, hugs often, and forgives easily. When I think of my future home, I don't imagine silence. I imagine noise. Music playing, laughter echoing, tiny feet running around. I want that chaos, the kind that means everyone feels safe enough to be themselves. And yet, part of me is scared, because I've lived too long under the weight of people's expectations. What if I accidentally pass that on? What if my kid feels the shadow of BTS's Jungkook before they even know what their own name means? That thought makes my heart race. It's the one fear I can't shake. Because I know fame is both a blessing and a curse. It gives you everything but takes your privacy. And privacy is what I crave most for them. There's this memory, I can't forget when we were in New York years ago after a big show. We were in the car, windows tinted, but fans were still chasing. I looked out and saw this one little girl crying, holding a poster with my name on it. She couldn't have been older than 10. And all I could think was, she should be sleeping right now. She should be dreaming of her own life, not mine. I smiled and waved, but inside, something broke. Because I realized one day that could be my child, lost in someone else's story instead of living her own. Jimin once told me, you can't protect them from the world, but you can prepare them for it. That's probably true. So if I can't hide my kids from fame, I'll teach them how to see it for what it is, a spotlight, not a purpose. I'll teach them that it's okay to step out of the light sometimes. That there's power in privacy, in simplicity, in stillness. Sometimes when I imagine the future, I see all 7 of us sitting together again, older, grayer, maybe holding our own kids. Taehyung's child playing piano, Jimin's kid dancing, Yoongi's teaching someone how to produce, Jin cooking, Hobi laughing, Namjoon reading poetry out loud, and maybe my kid is just sitting quietly, watching, learning that love comes in many forms. That masculinity isn't about strength, it's about softness, consistency, presence. People think idols dream of raising the next generation of stars, but I don't. I dream of raising someone who's kind. That's it. Not famous, not talented, just kind. Kind to animals, kind to strangers, kind to themselves. Because that's the hardest lesson I've had to learn. If I could talk to my younger self, I'd tell him, you don't have to be perfect to be loved. Maybe that's what I'll tell my kids every night before they sleep, that they're enough, even on the days they fail. Especially on those days, because those are the days love matters most. And if they ever come to me and say, Dad, I don't want to be like you, I'll smile and say, good, you're not supposed to be. Because I don't want to raise a copy of me. I want to raise someone who feels safe being completely different. You know, sometimes people think having kids means passing on your legacy, but I don't want that. I want to pass on peace. I want them to live a life where applause isn't currency, where silence isn't scary, where they can just breathe without being watched. So yeah, maybe I'll raise my kids differently. Maybe that means moving somewhere quiet. Maybe that means teaching them music, not for fame, but for healing. Maybe that means showing them my flaws instead of hiding them. Maybe that means crying in front of them when life hurts. Because that's the truth. I don't want to be their hero. I want to be their home. Sometimes I think about what kind of stories I'll tell my kids when they're old enough to understand who their dad really is. Not the version they'll see online, not the clips, not the edited perfection, but the real story. The nights when I didn't believe in myself, the shows where I smiled even though I wanted to disappear. The times I failed and had to start over quietly when nobody was watching. Because if they only grow up seeing my success, they'll never learn the beauty of struggling, honestly. I think about what it would be like to sit on the couch one night, maybe after dinner, and tell them, Appa wasn't always confident. I'd tell them about the early days when I didn't think I was enough. About being the youngest in BTS, surrounded by 6 older brothers who were all stronger, wiser, louder. I'd tell them about crying in bathrooms, pretending I was fine, about watching the others carry the team when I didn't know my own worth yet. And then I'd tell them how those same brothers taught me that strength doesn't come from being perfect, it comes from staying when you want to run. That's what I want my kids to learn, that staying when it's hard is its own kind of courage. Yoongijungkook once told me, you don't have to prove you're strong, just keep showing up. That sentence changed the way I live. I think about it every time I imagine fatherhood. Because I don't want to raise kids who think they have to be extraordinary. I want to raise kids who know that being present is already enough. When I was younger, I thought success would heal me. That if I worked hard enough, trained long enough, achieved enough, the emptiness would disappear. But it didn't. It just got quieter, smarter. It hid behind trophies and headlines. I don't want my children to chase that kind of validation. I want to teach them that peace isn't something you win, it's something you protect. I imagine teaching them how to handle pressure. Like one day, maybe my daughter comes home from school and says, "Dad, people found out who you are." And I'll look at her probably nervous. And I'll say, "So what do you think that means?" And if she says, "It means they'll treat me differently," I'll tell her, "Only if you let them." Because I want her to know that her worth was never connected to my name, that she can choose who she becomes. Namjoon always says, control what you can and accept what you can't. I think about that advice every time I imagine parenting, because I won't be able to control what the world says about me or about them, but I can control how we talk about it at home. I can make sure they know that love inside these walls doesn't depend on anything outside them. That's my plan. To build a house that feels stronger than any rumor, safer than any fame. Sometimes I wonder how it'll feel for them to see the old videos one day. The concerts, the interviews, the fan cams. Will they feel proud, embarrassed, curious? I hope they see the truth that behind all the performances, their dad was just a man trying to make sense of his heart. I hope they don't see me as an idol. I hope they see me as someone who kept trying, even when he got it wrong. And I want to teach them about friendship, about how lucky I am to have the members. I tell them how Taehyung once stayed up all night just to keep me company before a big show. How Jimin wrote me notes when I doubted myself. How Jin cooked when I was too tired to eat. How Hobie made me laugh when I was burnt out. How Yoongi told me the truth even when it hurt. How Namjoon carried us all when we were lost. I want them to know that real love isn't always romantic. Sometimes it's just being there for someone without needing anything back. There's this thing I think about a lot, how I grew up under constant eyes, but my future kids might grow up in my shadow. And that's something I have to prepare for, because I don't ever want them to feel small because of my story. I want them to feel inspired, not pressured. And if that means walking away from certain parts of fame, I'll do it. No hesitation. I've had my time under the light. They deserve to grow under the sundae. I imagine taking them back to Busan someday, showing them where I came from, the streets where I used to walk home from school, the little restaurants where I ate tteokbokki with friends before life got complicated. I'd tell them, this is where it all started. And I hope your life starts somewhere simple too. Because I want them to understand that greatness doesn't come from where you end up. It comes from where you begin and how you keep your heart along the way. Sometimes I think about the values I'll pass down. I want them to be curious like Namjoon, compassionate like Jimin, grounded like Yoongi, joyful like Hobie, brave like Jin, and free like Taehyung, and maybe a little like me, but not too much. I hope they inherit the good parts and learn from the rest. I want them to see that even idols are human, even heroes fail, even fathers can be scared. There was this one night when I couldn't sleep, and I started writing notes on my phone, little lessons I want to tell them someday. Things like, never chase someone who makes you feel smaller. Don't confuse peace with silence. Apologize fast, forgive faster. If you ever lose your way, sing. Those are the things I wish someone had told me when I was their age. Maybe that's how I'll talk to them, not through lectures, but through stories. And maybe when they're older, I'll play them BTS songs. Not to show off, but to show them that their dad once lived inside music that held millions of hearts. I'll tell them how every song was a mirror of who we were, and how the most important lyrics were never about fame, they were about finding ourselves. I'll tell them, this is what happens when you don't give up. You know, it's strange. I used to dream about Grammys and sold out tours. Now, I dream about watching my kids sleep peacefully, about holding their hand on the way to school, about hearing them laugh without fear. Maybe that's growth. Maybe it's me learning that joy doesn't have to be loud. Jimin told me once, you already have the heart of a father. I didn't understand what he meant at first, but maybe it's true. Maybe fatherhood isn't something that begins when a baby is born. Maybe it starts when you decide to love differently, when you decide to care deeper, when you decide to stop chasing perfection and start building peace. So that's what I'm doing now, building peace. Inside me, around me, for the people I love, and for the ones I'll meet later. Because when the time finally comes, when I hold that tiny hand for the first time, I want to be ready, not as Jungkook from BTS, but as Jungkook, a man who finally learned what love really means. You know, every time I talk about this topic, family, kids, what kind of father I want to be, it still feels unreal. Like I'm standing somewhere between the person I am and the person I'm still becoming. I haven't even figured myself out completely, yet here I am talking about raising little humans. But maybe that's the whole point. Maybe being ready to raise kids doesn't mean you have everything figured out. It means you're finally willing to learn again. There was a night not too long ago when I was sitting in my apartment, no lights on, just the sound of rain against the glass. I had this playlist running slow songs, ones I don't even show people, and I caught myself thinking, what kind of home do I want to build? Not house, not walls, but home. Because I've lived in a lot of places, hotel rooms, tour buses, studios, but none of them really felt like home until I started seeing what love actually looked like in the little moments with my members. When we were younger, BTS wasn't just a band, it was survival. 7 boys chasing a dream that looked impossible. We fought, cried, laughed, healed all under the same roof. That kind of togetherness shaped me, and when I think about my kids, I want them to grow up with that same feeling, that even when the world doesn't understand them, there will always be one place that does. That's what I want our home to be, a place where they don't have to perform. I used to think success was the ultimate goal, but now I realize peace is the real success. That's what I want them to inherit. Not fame, not pressure, but peace. I want to raise kids who don't have to spend their adult years unlearning the idea that they need to prove their worth. Because that's what I had to do. I had to unlearn the belief that love only comes after perfection. That's a painful habit to break, and I never want them to feel it. Sometimes I talk to Taehyung about this. He has this deep, old soul way of thinking. One night, he told me, bro, when you have kids, they're gonna grow up knowing you are the biggest artist in the world. But if you want them to respect you, you have to show them what humility looks like. That hit me. Because it's true, kids don't care about fame, they care about presence. And fame has a funny way of stealing presence from you. So if I want to be a real dad someday, I have to learn how to slow down now. That's what I've been trying to do lately. Slowing down. Waking up without immediately thinking about what I need to achieve. Taking quiet walks at night. Cooking for myself. Spending time in silence. These things sound small, but they're changing me. Because how can I teach my kids peace if I've never learned it myself? Sometimes I picture it me sitting in the kitchen early in the morning, making pancakes while my daughter or son walks in sleepy, rubbing their eyes. They don't care who I am, they just want breakfast. And I'll look at them and think, this is the version of life I was working for all along. Not the fame, not the applause, just moments like that. Real moments. You know, people often say I'm serious about everything I do, but when it comes to fatherhood, I want to be playful. I want my kids to laugh with me, not be afraid of me. I want them to know I can be goofy and still responsible. I want them to feel safe enough to make mistakes. Because mistakes are where the best lessons come from. Jimin once told me, you'd be a good dad because you care too much. I laughed, but maybe he's right. I care deeply, sometimes too deeply. I care about every detail, every emotion, every person I love. And if I can channel that into being a parent one day, maybe that's how I'll show love, not just by saying it, but by being there. But I'll be honest, there's a fear inside me that doesn't go away. What if I can't give them a normal childhood? What if they grow up surrounded by cameras and whispers, by people comparing them to me before they even understand who they are? I hate that thought. I hate that something as innocent as their life could be interrupted by the world's curiosity. That's why I think about living somewhere quiet someday. Somewhere they can run outside barefoot without anyone knowing who they are. There's a certain peace I've never really experienced: privacy. It's strange how something so simple feels like luxury to me. I want that for them. I want to be the kind of father who can sit at a park watching his kids play without flashlights going off. Maybe that means moving far away someday. Maybe that means choosing simplicity over everything else. Because fame can make you feel alive, but peace makes you whole. Yoongijungkook once told me something during a late night talk that I can't forget. He said, "If you want to be a good dad, don't teach them who to be. Teach them how to be." That stayed with me. Because the world will teach them who to be, what to look like, how to act, what success means. But only I can teach them how to breathe through the noise, how to stay gentle in a world that rewards loudness, how to find stillness even when everything moves fast. I think that's why I'm still waiting to get married. Because I don't just want someone who loves me, I want someone who understands this version of the part that values quiet over chaos, depth over display, meaning over attention. I want to build something real before I build a family. Because I've learned that you can't give peace to someone if you don't already live in it. When I look at my members, I think about how much they've taught me about what love looks like. Jin taught me that taking care of people isn't about grand gestures, it's about the little things, like remembering their favorite food. Namjoon taught me that wisdom doesn't mean being serious all the time, it means being kind. Jimin taught me how to express emotion without shame. Hobi taught me that happiness is something you create, not something that finds you. Yoongi taught me to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable. And taehyung taught me that love doesn't always need words. Those lessons are what I'll pass on. Not money, not legacy lessons. Because that's the real inheritance. I want my future kids to grow up surrounded by people who remind them it's okay to be human, who remind them that vulnerability is power, who remind them that family isn't built by perfection, it's built by patience. One day, I'll probably sit down and tell them everything. About the tours, the exhaustion, the laughter, the nights I cried after shows because I missed home, the moments when I felt lost, even when the world was watching. And I'll tell them, your dad lived many lives before you came, but this one, the one with you, will be his favorite. Because at the end of the day, that's the truth. I don't want my story to end with fame. I want it to continue through peace, through love, through the next generation, raised differently, loved honestly, and allowed to just be. There's something about getting older that changes the way you look at time. When I was younger, I used to chase it. Every second felt like something I had to catch before it slipped away. A new song, a new stage, a new version of myself. But lately, I've started realizing that maybe life isn't about chasing time. Maybe it's about learning to stand still long enough to feel it. And I think that's what I want to teach my kids one day. Not to live fast, but to live fully. You see, fame teaches you speed. Everything moves fast. Decisions, emotions, even love. But peace teaches you patience. It teaches you how to breathe before reacting, how to listen before speaking, how to love without needing to be right. That's something I've had to learn the hard way. And honestly, I'm still learning. I want my kids to grow up knowing that patience isn't weakness, it's wisdom. I remember when we were filming one of our early music videos, I was maybe 19, still figuring out how to exist in front of a camera without losing myself. I was exhausted that day, but Jimin looked at me and said, "You don't have to rush every part of your life." At the time, I didn't understand it, but now I do. That one sentence changed me, because if you live your whole life rushing to the next thing, you miss the beauty of what's already here. That's what I want to pass on, that it's okay to take your time becoming who you're meant to be. I imagine my future home having moments that move slow. Mornings without alarms, breakfast that lasts too long, walks without purpose, I want my kids to learn how to be still without feeling unproductive, because that's something I didn't learn until much later, how to exist without constantly performing. Namjoon once said something during one of our long talks that stuck with me. Children don't remember what you said. They remember how you made them feel. That hit me deeply, because when I think about my own life, that's exactly true. I don't remember every word my parents said, but I remember the feeling of being supported when I failed. The feeling of hearing my mom's voice on the phone after a hard day. The feeling of safety, and that's what I want my kids to carry with them. Not perfection, but peace. You know, being in BTS taught me a lot about what love actually means. It's not always soft or pretty. Sometimes love is staying quiet when you want to argue. Sometimes it's letting someone go through their own pain even though it hurts to watch. Sometimes it's staying even when it's uncomfortable. I want to raise my kids with that kind of love, not the kind that fixes everything, but the kind that stays through everything. There's something else I've been thinking about lately: discipline. Growing up as a trainee, I lived under rules. Wake up early, train all day, repeat. That structure built me, but it also broke me in some ways. It taught me how to survive, but not always how to feel. So when I imagine raising my kids, I don't want to control them, I want to guide them. I don't want them to fear me, I want them to understand me. I want them to know that mistakes don't make them bad, they make them real. Taehyung once told me, you can't protect them from pain, but you can walk with them through it. That's the kind of father I want to be. The kind who doesn't just tell his kids what's right or wrong, but helps them figure out why they feel what they feel. The kind who listens before judging. Because I didn't always have that kind of space growing up. Everything was about results, how good you sang, how well you danced, how much you improved. But emotions don't work like that. You can't measure healing the way you measure success. And I think that's the core of it. I want to raise emotionally intelligent kids. Kids who can say, I'm sad or I'm angry without shame. Kids who know it's okay to rest. Kids who understand that sometimes not knowing what comes next is completely fine. Because when I look back at my own journey, I realize how much pressure I carried before I was even an adult. And I don't want that weight for them. Sometimes I wonder what kind of stories the world will tell about me when I'm older. Maybe they'll say, he was talented, hardworking, dedicated. But what I really want my kids to say is, he was there. That's all I want. To be there for their first steps, their bad days, their dreams. To be present in the moments that actually matter. Because if there's one thing fame teaches you, it's how easily moments can slip away when you're too busy chasing the next. Jin once said during dinner, when you become a dad, you'll finally understand what real tiredness feels like. And we all laughed. But he was right in ways he didn't realize. Because being a dad isn't about exhaustion, it's about giving energy even when you have none left. It's about choosing love every single day, even when you're drained. And I think that's what being in BTS has trained me for all along, to give, to care, to show up no matter what. I know some people expect me to raise kids who will follow my path, to sing, to dance, to perform. But honestly, I don't care if they never step on a stage. I don't even care if they're shy, quiet, or unsure. All I want is for them to know that whatever they choose, I'll be proud. I'll be in their corner, no matter what. And if one day they ask me, Appa, what's the most important thing you've learned? I'll tell them this, that being loved and being seen aren't the same thing. That sometimes the loudest applause comes from the wrong crowd, and that the people who truly love you, they don't need to watch you, they just stay. That's the lesson I want to live, not just teach. To stop performing when the lights go out and start living when nobody's watching. Because that's the version of me I want my kids to meet, not Jungkook the idol, but Jungkook the human. The man who learned that gentleness is strength, that honesty is healing, and that love, real love, isn't something you earn. It's something you give again and again without expecting anything back. So yeah, maybe I'll raise my kids differently. Maybe I'll raise them to rest when they're tired, to speak when they're scared, to laugh even when things don't go their way. Maybe I'll raise them to live slower, softer, and freer. Because I've lived the other side, the fast, loud, exhausting version of life. And I don't want that for them. I want them to live differently, to breathe differently, to love different. And maybe, just maybe, when they grow up and look back, they'll understand that everything their dad went through, all the chaos, all the pain, all the beauty was so that he could learn how to give them the one thing he never had enough of: peace. You know what's strange? The older I get, the more I realize how little the world actually knows about. People see the shows, the interviews, the smiles, the stage lights, but not the quiet mornings, the doubts, the nights I sit alone questioning what all of this really means. Maybe that's why I keep thinking about family lately, because deep down, I think I'm craving something real, something that doesn't depend on applause to exist. I've spent more than half my life living for cameras. Every move calculated, every emotion analyzed. And now, I'm learning what it feels like to live for myself again. Maybe that's the first step in becoming the kind of father I want to be, to stop existing for the world and start existing for the people who truly need me. Because fame is loud, but love is quiet. And I want my kids to grow up in the quiet. There was a moment during tour, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when I stood backstage watching the members perform. The crowd was roaring, lights flashing, everything electric. But my eyes weren't on the stage. They were on them, on my brothers. On Namjoon leading us like the steady heartbeat he's always been. On Jimin giving everything he had to every note. On Taehyung smiling even though he'd barely slept. On Yoongi nodding along. Expression calm but proud. On Jin waving like the world was his family. On Hobi radiating joy like sunlight. I realized then, this is what love looks like. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And I thought to myself, if I can one day love my kids the way these guys love me through every version of myself, then I'll be okay. People assume being an idol means you know everything about love. But the truth is, I'm still learning. I've learned that love isn't always about protecting people from pain. It's about standing with them in it. I've learned that love isn't about saying the right thing. It's about showing up even when you don't know what to say. I've learned that sometimes love looks like giving space, not advice. These are lessons I want my kids to learn, not from my words, but from my actions. I think about the kind of home I want to build a lot. Not just a place to sleep, but a feeling. A space where silence isn't uncomfortable, where laughter doesn't have to be loud to be real, where nobody's trying to be perfect, where even sadness has a place at the table. I want my kids to grow up knowing it's okay to cry, it's okay to fail, it's okay to start over. Because life will break them at some point, it breaks everyone, but I want them to know that broken doesn't mean ruined. It just means real. Yoongi once told me, healing isn't about fixing yourself, it's about understanding yourself. That sentence has been sitting in my chest ever since. I want to raise kids who understand themselves, who can sit with their emotions and say, this hurts, without shame, who can stand in their truth even when the world doesn't understand them. Because that's something I had to fight to learn. When you grow up being told how to look, how to act, how to feel, you forget what your own emotions sound like. I don't ever want that for them. Sometimes I imagine my future son or daughter asking me, Appa, what was it like being in BTS? And I'll smile, probably take a deep breath, and tell them the truth. That it was beautiful and heavy at the same time. That it gave me everything and took pieces too. That it was a journey of love, brotherhood, sacrifice, and learning how to stay grounded when the world tried to lift me too high. And I'll tell them that even with all the fame, the thing I'm most proud of isn't the music, it's the moments of honesty. The moments when we looked at each other and said, I'm not okay, and still kept going. That's the kind of strength I want them to see as real courage. Not pretending, but persevering. I think one of the hardest parts about planning for the future is realizing how much you have to unlearn. I've spent so long trying to be the best that now I'm learning how to just be. No titles, no rankings, no noise, just being enough. And I think that's what fatherhood will be like too. Unlearning control, unlearning fear, unlearning perfection, letting things be messy, letting love be loud and quiet and unpredictable all at once. Jin once said something that made me laugh at first but later hit me deep. He said, "When you're a dad, you'll probably cry more than your kids." He's right. I feel things deeply. Always have. I cry when something moves me, when I feel proud, when I feel seen. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what I'll teach them, that tears don't make you weak. They make you human. There's a part of me that already feels protective of these future kids, even though they don't exist yet. Maybe that's how you know you're growing up, when you start thinking beyond yourself, when your dreams start including someone else's peace. I don't dream about fame anymore. I dream about small things, driving them to school, teaching them how to sing, not for applause, but for joy. Watching them find who they are without pressure to become someone else. Sometimes I think about my dad. He wasn't always emotional, but I know he loved me in his own quiet way. I think about how much he sacrificed so I could chase my dream. And I realize every generation just tries to love better than the one before. That's all I want to do. To love better, to love softer, to love smarter, to give more patience than pressure, more presence than perfection. I imagine taking them to a BTS concert someday, not as Jungkook's kids, but just as fans of music. I'd stand in the crowd beside them, singing along quietly. Maybe they wouldn't even realize their dad was once up there, and that would be perfect. Because I don't want to raise them inside my story, I want to raise them free enough to write their own. Jimin told me something a while back. We were sitting backstage, lights dimmed, crowd still screaming outside. And he said, "One day, you'll make a home that feels like this, where love doesn't need words, just presence." I think that's when I realized what kind of father I want to be. Not the strict one, not the cool one, just the present one. The one who sits through silence, who listens more than he speaks, who chooses love every single time. I want to raise my kids differently. I want them to look at me and see, not a star, not a legend, but a man who kept choosing truth, who loved deeply, who wasn't afraid to cry, who made mistakes but kept learning. Because in the end, that's what this life is about, becoming someone who can love honestly, live gently, and pass down peace. And if one day they ever ask me what my biggest dream was, I'll tell them this: it wasn't the awards, it wasn't the fame, it was them. They were the dream I was preparing for all along. Hey everyone, it's Jungkook again. You know, I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately, not the kind the world writes about, but the kind that stays inside people's hearts, the kind that doesn't fade when the cameras stop. Maybe that's what becoming older does to you. It makes you ask, when everything else fades, what will still matter? For me, it's always love. It's always the people. It's always the moments that no one records. If I ever have kids, I don't want them to inherit my fame. I want them to inherit my heart. Not the perfect, polished version, the real one. The one that's anxious sometimes. The one that still doubts. The one that still dreams even when it's scared. Because I think that's what honesty looks like. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that honesty lasts longer than popularity. I remember this one night after a concert in Tokyo. I was sitting in the dressing room, just staring at my hands. Everyone had gone home, the noise had faded, and it was just me. And I thought, what happens when all of this ends? That question scared me at first. But now, it doesn't, because I realize it's supposed to end, all of it. The lights, the noise, the pressure, it's supposed to fade so you can find what's real underneath. That's the version of myself I want my kids to meet. Not the performer, but the person who finally made peace with silence. Namjoon once said, "If you don't define your values, the world will define them for you." I didn't understand that when I was 20. I do now. The world will always tell you what success looks like. Money, attention, approval, but peace doesn't shout like that. It whispers. And I want my kids to listen for those whispers, the moments of real joy, real love, real stillness. I want to raise them to understand balance, but not the kind that looks perfect on paper. I want them to know that balance isn't about dividing time equally. It's about giving presence fully. That means when you work, you give everything. When you rest, you actually rest. When you love all the way. Because I didn't always know how to do that. For years, I was physically there, but emotionally absent, too tired, too focused on what's next. I don't want that for them. Sometimes I catch myself imagining how it'll feel when they're old enough to ask, "Dad, what was your life like before us?" And I'll probably laugh. Because how do you explain to a child that you once stood in front of millions of people and still felt lonely sometimes? I think I'd tell them the truth, that I was grateful for every second of it, but that the real happiness I was chasing wasn't on the stage. It was in the moments after, when we'd all sit in the dark van heading home, laughing at something stupid, tired, but together. That's what life really is, those small human moments that don't trend online. Yoongi once told me that peace doesn't come when everything's quiet, it comes when you're no longer afraid of the noise. I didn't get it at first, but now I do. Because peace isn't about escaping the world, it's about building a space inside yourself that the world can't break. And I think that's what I want to teach my kids. That peace isn't something you find, it's something you practice. When I was younger, I thought I had to be tough. I thought being emotional made me weak. But as I grew up, I realized that the people who feel deeply are the ones who truly live. Jimin helped me understand that. He's always been so open with his emotions. It's something I admire about him. He once told me, "If you hide how you feel, you'll start hiding who you are." That stuck with me, and that's what I want my kids to learn, to never be ashamed of their feelings, to speak them, to live them. I've seen too many people grow up believing they had to be strong all the time, but I think real strength is knowing when to soften. Real courage is knowing when to say, "I need help." I want my kids to grow up knowing that vulnerability isn't something to hide, it's something to honor, because that's how you build connection, real connection. I imagine little things like tucking them in at night, reading stories, maybe singing them to sleep. I don't even know if my voice will calm them down or make them laugh, but I know it'll be real, and I think that's all that matters. Realness, not perfection, not performance, just real moments that feel alive. Taehyung once said to me during one of our long midnight talks, "When you have kids, teach them how to be curious." And I love that. Because curiosity is what keeps life beautiful. It's what keeps the heart young. I want them to ask questions, to make mistakes, to challenge everything, including me. I want them to grow into people who think for themselves. You know, I've always been surrounded by love from fans all over the world, but sometimes I wonder what it'll feel like to experience a different kind of love, one that doesn't expect anything back. The kind a child gives you when they look at you like you're the safest place in the world. I don't know that feeling yet, but I want to. Not because I'm chasing it, but because I think that's what life is preparing me for, to finally love without fear. I think the most important thing I'll teach them is that they don't have to be like me, that they can find their own rhythm. I'll tell them, you don't owe the world your greatness, you owe yourself your peace. Because I learned that too late. I learned it after years of chasing approval that never truly filled me. Hobie once told me something during tour rehearsals that I'll never forget. He said, "When you give love, make sure you're not empty." That's such a simple sentence, but it changed how I see everything. Because I realized if I ever want to be a good father, I have to keep my own soul full. I can't pour from an empty heart. So that's what I'm doing now, filling it back up with silence, reflection, gratitude. Sometimes I wonder if I'll be ready, if I'll ever know enough, heal enough, grow enough. But then I remember what Jin said to me once. You'll never be fully ready to love you, just decide to do it anyway. And maybe that's what fatherhood will be too. Not being perfect, but being present. Not knowing all the answers, but being willing to learn them together. I want to raise my kids differently. I want to raise them to value truth over image, kindness over approval, curiosity over fear. I want them to grow up knowing that the world will try to tell them who they are, but they always get the final say. And maybe when they're old enough to understand, they'll see that their dad didn't just build a career. He built a life he could finally be proud of. Because that's my real goal now. Not to be remembered for what I did, but for how I loved. Lately, I've been catching myself imagining things I never used to think about, small, quiet details of a future that feels closer every year. Like what it'll feel like to walk into my house and hear laughter that isn't rehearsed. Or what it'll be like to hear someone call me Appa for the first time. Just one word, but I think it'll change everything. You know, I've spent most of my life being defined by sound, music, crowds, applause. But that one word, Appa, will probably be the most meaningful sound I'll ever hear. Because it won't be coming from a fan or a reporter or an audience, it'll come from love that doesn't expect anything back. I think that's the kind of love I've been searching for all along, even without realizing it. When I talk about raising my kids differently, people might think, I'll spoil them or protect them too much. But that's not it. What I mean is I want to raise them consciously, with intention. I want to make them feel seen before they're successful, loved before they're perfect, and safe even when they mess up. Because that's the kind of childhood that heals generations. I've seen too many people, even adults, chasing approval they should have gotten as kids. I don't want that for them. I don't want them to grow up searching for validation from strangers. I want them to wake up already knowing they're enough, no matter what the world said. Jimin told me once, when you become a father, you'll probably write your most honest song. I laughed at first, but I think he's right. Because parenthood isn't about being a superhero, it's about being real. It's about facing all the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. And I've got a few of those parts still waiting for me. Sometimes I imagine having those tough conversations like the day they realize their dad used to be famous. Maybe they'll come across old videos one day, see me performing, see people screaming my name, and ask, "Was that really you?" And I'll tell them, "Yeah, that was me. But this version of me, the one cooking breakfast, walking you to school, listening to you talk about your day, that's the one I worked hardest to become." Because I don't want my fame to be their story. I want it to be their background, not their burden. Namjoon said something during a long walk in LA that I'll never forget. He said, "The best gift you can give your future kids is a version of you who's not at war with himself." That hit me hard, because for years I was fighting to be perfect, to be accepted, to be loved in ways that didn't hurt. But maybe growing up means ending that war. Maybe preparing to be a father means forgiving yourself for all the versions you had to become to survive. I want my kids to see me gentle, to see me laugh more than I stress, to see me hold their mom's hand and not care if anyone's watching, to see me say sorry when I'm wrong, because that's how they'll learn what love looks like, not from my advice, but from my example. Taehyung once told me, "You'll be a poetic dad. You'll turn everything into a lesson." Maybe he's right. I see lessons in everything these days. In the way rain falls, in how silence feels, in how the members care for each other even when we're apart. Every moment teaches something if you pay attention. I think that's what I'll teach them too, to notice the small things. To see life not just as noise, but as rhythm. Yoongi always says, "Don't talk about peace, live it." That's something I'll carry into my future family. Because you can't teach peace from chaos. You can't preach calm if you never slow down. So I've been learning how to slow down now, before I'm responsible for someone else's heart. I spend more time alone these days, not because I'm lonely, but because solitude has become my classroom. I'm learning who I am without applause, without expectation. And the more I learn, the more I realize that's the version of me my kids deserve. The one who's grounded, soft, honest. Sometimes I picture moments that probably sound ordinary to most people. Driving with them to the beach, watching them fall asleep in the back seat, building sand castles until the tide comes in. But to me, that's everything. Because I've lived the extraordinary, I've seen the lights, the stages, the world, What I crave now is the ordinary, the kind of life that doesn't need to be documented to matter. When I talk to the members about the future, we joke around about whose kids will be the most mischievous. Hobie says mine will climb furniture. Jin says they'll eat too much candy. And Jimin says they'll sing before they can talk. Maybe he's right. Maybe they'll grow up with rhythm in their veins. But I hope they never feel pressure to make that rhythm public. I hope they keep it sacred, just for themselves. There's a story I'll probably tell them one day about the time I almost forgot who I was outside of music. I'll tell them how I used to think my worth was measured by what I produced. And I'll tell them how the people I love, the members, my family, my fans taught me that being isn't something you earn, it's something you remember. And when they ask me what I want for them, I'll say freedom. Freedom to grow without fear, freedom to rest without guilt, freedom to dream without apology. Because that's what I've been chasing all along, even when I didn't have the words for it. Sometimes I look at kids when I'm out in public, how they laugh without hesitation, how they cry without shame, and I think, that's what purity looks like. I hope I never take that from them. I hope I protect that in them. I hope I never let the world convince them that growing up means losing that softness, and if I ever mess up, which I will, I'll be honest about it. I'll sit them down and say, Appa is human too. Because I don't want them to see me as perfect. I want them to see me as present. Imperfectly present, but real. Maybe that's the legacy I want to leave behind. Not a name, not a brand, not an empire, but a generation raised with softness. Kids who grow up knowing it's okay to be gentle in a world that tells them to be hard. Because when I picture the future now, I don't see fame. I see a kitchen table. I see laughter. I see forgiveness. I see love that doesn't need to be posted to be real. I see a man who finally understands that peace isn't found in the spotlight. It's built quietly, one honest moment at a time. And that's the plan. That's how I want to raise my kids. Differently, I've been sitting in the studio tonight, not working on a song, just thinking. No lights on, no beat in the background, just quiet. And in that quiet, I started wondering, what would I actually tell my kids about this life? About what it's like to dream big, to love deeply, to lose yourself and find yourself all over again. Because one day, they'll ask. Kids always do. They'll want to know how I got here, what it cost, what it felt like. And I don't want to give them a filtered story. I want to give them the truth, the raw, unedited version. The version where I was scared, where I failed, where I almost gave up but didn't. Because I think truth teaches more than perfection ever could. I'll tell them about the early mornings in the practice rooms, the long nights of rehearsals, the exhaustion that lived in my bones. I'll tell them about the times I felt invisible, even in front of millions. And I'll tell them about the moments that saved me, the laughter backstage, the hugs after shows, the quiet encouragement from the members when I thought I couldn't do it anymore. I'll tell them about Jimin's kindness, about how Namjoon's words guided me, about how Yoongi's honesty grounded me, about how Jin reminded me to laugh, how Hobie carried light when we had none, how Taehyung taught me to see beauty in the smallest thing. And then I'll tell them this. You don't need to live like that. You don't need to chase love through achievement. You can start from love and let everything else follow. That's what I mean when I say I want to raise them differently. I don't want them to prove themselves into love. I want them to know love first, then build everything else from there. Sometimes I catch myself imagining little moments, like maybe one day I'll walk them to school and they'll hold my hand without knowing that the same hand once held microphones in front of stadiums. Maybe one day they'll come home upset about something small and I'll kneel down and listen. Not lecture, just listen. Because I know how it feels when people talk at you instead of to you.